The world was white and silent, a pristine, endless white that stretched from the tips of our skis to the jagged peaks that clawed at the pale sky. My name is Yuri, and I was just one of 9, our hearts beating with the rhythm of adventure. We were young, filled with the kind of reckless optimism that only youth can afford. The crisp air burned our lungs in the most pleasant way, a clean, sharp sting that reminded us we were alive. Our laughter echoed in the vast emptiness of the Ural Mountains, a fleeting sound against the ancient silence of the slopes. We were a tight-knit group, knit together by the shared love for the untamed wild. Igor, our leader, was the steady hand, his gaze always fixed on the horizon, his confidence a beacon for us all. The first few days were a blur of strenuous trekking and joyful camaraderie. We would ski until our muscles ached and our faces were numb from the wind, then gather in the evenings, huddled close for warmth. The fire would crackle and spit, casting dancing shadows that played upon our smiling faces as we shared stories and sipped hot tea. Zina would play her mandolin, a sweet, melancholic sound that seemed to hang in the frozen air long after the last note was played. We felt invincible, masters of this frozen kingdom. The mountain, in its majestic beauty, felt like a benevolent giant watching over us. But even then, in those early, happy moments, a subtle disquiet began to thread its way into the fabric of our journey. It was a feeling I couldn't quite name, a whisper at the edge of hearing. It started with the silence. Not the peaceful, comforting silence of a winter wilderness, but a heavy, expectant hush that seemed to swallow all sound. Even our own voices, our laughter, felt muffled, as if the air itself was too dense to carry the vibrations. Sometimes, I would turn my head quickly, certain I had heard a footstep just behind me, but there was only the endless, undisturbed snow. The local Mansi hunters we'd met briefly before our final push had warned us. They spoke of this mountain, Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, with a quiet reverence and fear. They spoke of spirits, of strange forces that did not welcome outsiders. We, in our modern arrogance, had dismissed their words as folklore, charming tales for a winter's night. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent, painting the snow in hues of orange and violet, we saw them, strange lights in the sky. They were not stars, nor were they any aircraft we could identify. They were glowing orbs, moving in slow, deliberate patterns against the darkening canvas of the sky. We stood mesmerized, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Igor tried to rationalize it, suggesting it could be some sort of military test, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. The lights vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving behind a profound sense of unease. The mountain no longer felt like a benevolent giant. It felt like an entity, ancient and aware, and its eyes were now fixed upon us. That night, sleep did not come easily. The wind howled a mournful song against the fabric of our tent, a sound that seemed to carry with it a warning. I lay there, listening, and I could hear the restless stirring of the others. The shared, unspoken fear was a tangible presence in the cramped space. I remember closing my eyes and seeing those strange, silent orbs dancing in the darkness behind my eyelids. The feeling of being watched intensified, a suffocating pressure that made each breath a conscious effort. The sense of a normal expedition was gone, replaced by a creeping dread. We were no longer just climbers on a mountain. We were intruders in a place that did not want us, and the boundary between the natural and the inexplicable was beginning to dissolve around us. The real journey, the one into fear, was just beginning. The following morning brought a deceptive calm, the sky a fragile, pale blue. But the oppressive silence remained, heavier than before. We pushed onward, deeper into the embrace of the mountains, but the landscape began to feel alien, hostile. The trees grew sparse, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes, like skeletal arms reaching out from the snow. The joy of the trek had curdled into a grim determination to simply move forward, to escape the palpable sense of being scrutinized. Igor, our unshakable leader, now consulted his map with a frequency that betrayed his own growing uncertainty. A wrong turn was made. I don't know if it was the magnetic pull of the mountain or a simple human error, but we veered off our intended path, drawn towards the barren, windswept slopes of Kholat Syakhl. It was a decision that felt both wrong and inevitable, as if our feet were being guided by a will that was not our own. The wind picked up, a low, guttural moan that grew into a furious shriek. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding, horizontal torrent that stung our exposed skin and reduced visibility to almost zero. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. We were walking blind, a tiny, fragile line of humanity against the raw, untamed power of the storm. The cold was a physical entity, seeping through our layers of clothing, leaching the warmth from our very bones. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of my composure. We were lost, hopelessly, terrifyingly lost. It was Igor who made the call to set up camp. It seemed like madness. The slope was exposed, offering no protection from the relentless gale. Standard procedure, the very rules of survival we had all sworn by, dictated that we should retreat to the relative safety of the forest line below. But we didn't. We began to pitch the tent right there, on that desolate, angled expanse of snow, as the storm raged around us with demonic fury. Our fingers were numb, clumsy, fumbling with the frozen canvas and poles. Every gust of wind threatened to tear the tent from our grasp and send it hurtling into the white abyss. There was a desperation in our movements, a frantic energy born not of hope, but of sheer terror. Looking back, I cannot explain the logic. It felt as though the mountain itself had pinned us to its side, refusing to let us go. The decision was not born of strategy, but of a complete surrender to some unseen force. It was as if our collective will had been eroded, leaving only the instinct to huddle together against the encroaching darkness. Finally, the tent was up, a fragile, pathetic shelter against the immense power of the wilderness. We stumbled inside, collapsing on top of one another in the cramped semi-darkness, the sound of the wind a deafening roar. We were exhausted, frozen, and saturated with a deep, primal fear. But we were together. We had our shelter. For a fleeting moment, a tiny flicker of relief. We prepared for what we thought would be a simple, albeit harsh, night. We tried to eat, but our hands trembled too much to hold our utensils steady. The conversation was sparse, strained, each of us lost in our own fearful thoughts. The orange glow of our small stove cast long, distorted shadows on the tent walls, making us all look like strangers to one another. And then, the sound began. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the ground beneath us, traveling up through the snow, through our bodies, and into our teeth. It was a deep, unsettling hum, accompanied by a crushing pressure that made the air in the tent feel thick and heavy, as if the mountain itself was beginning to groan in its sleep, and we were trapped upon its chest. Inside the tent, the air grew thick with a fear so potent it was almost liquid. The low vibrational hum was no longer just a sound. It was a physical presence. It resonated in our skulls, making our thoughts scatter like frightened birds. We looked at each other, our eyes wide in the flickering lamplight, seeing our own terror reflected back. The crushing pressure intensified, as if the weight of the entire sky was settling upon our fragile shelter. It became hard to breathe, each inhale a struggle against an invisible force. We were trapped, mice in a box that was slowly being squeezed. Outside, the storm raged on, but its fury felt distant, secondary to the immediate internal horror that was unfolding. The threat was no longer outside. It was with us. Then, a light bloomed against the tent's canvas. It wasn't the cold, white light of a flare or a searchlight. It was a brilliant, searing orange, impossibly bright, that pulsed in time with the deep hum. It bathed our tiny space in a sickening, otherworldly glow, erasing all shadows and exposing the raw fear on every face. The light felt intelligent, invasive. It seemed to press against the fabric, not with heat, but with a palpable energy that made the hairs on our arms stand on end. We shrank back from the walls of the tent, huddling together in the center, a knot of pure animal terror. There were no screams. Our voices were stolen by the vibrating air, our throats constricted by a fear too profound for sound. And then the noise came. It wasn't just a sound, it was an assault. A deafening infrasonic wave that bypassed our ears and struck directly at our core. It was a sound you felt in your bones, in your organs. A violent, tearing sensation that threatened to rip us apart from the inside. It was the sound of reality itself being torn. In that moment, all rationality, all training, all discipline evaporated. The 9 of us, experienced hikers and students of science, were reduced to nothing more than primal instinct. The civilized mind shattered, leaving only one overwhelming impulse: escape. The tent was no longer a shelter. It was a tomb. It was the source of the agony. We had to get out. I don't remember who produced the knife. Perhaps it was several of us at once. I just remember the glint of steel in that hellish orange light. There was no time to fumble with the frozen zipper, no thought of the logical exit. The tent itself had become the enemy, the membrane containing the horror. A hand, desperate and shaking, slashed downwards. The sound of the canvas ripping was a sharp counterpoint to the deep, soul-shattering hum. One slash, then another. An opening was torn into our world, a dark, gaping wound leading out into the chaos of the storm. It was an escape into a different kind of death, but it was an escape nonetheless. A wave of frigid air and swirling snow blasted into the tent, a momentary shock that broke the paralysis. One by one, we scrambled, crawled, and pushed our way through the jagged tear in the fabric. There was no thought for boots, for coats, for survival gear. Some were in their socks, others completely barefoot. We burst from the suffocating orange glow of the tent into the screaming black and white maelstrom of the blizzard. The terrifying hum and the blinding light were gone, but they were replaced by the howling wind and the bite of a cold so extreme it felt like fire. We ran, stumbling and falling, away from the tent, away from that spot on the mountainside, fleeing into the lethal embrace of the polar night with nothing but the terror in our hearts to drive us on. The forest line. It was our only goal, a dark, serrated edge barely visible through the swirling snow. We half ran, half fell down the steep slope, the icy crust of the snow tearing at our bare feet and hands. The adrenaline that had propelled us from the tent was already fading, replaced by a deep, invasive cold that felt ancient and absolute. The wind was a physical blow, stealing the air from our lungs, its howl a symphony of utter desolation. We were no longer a group, but a scattered collection of terrified souls, each isolated in their own bubble of suffering. I could hear faint cries, names being called out, but the wind snatched them away instantly. Somehow, a few of us reached the tree line, stumbling towards the temporary shelter of a huge ancient cedar. Its branches, heavy with snow, offered a meager shield against the storm. I remember seeing Georgi and another Yuri, my namesake, frantically trying to start a fire. They broke off lower branches, their hands raw and bleeding, their movements clumsy with cold. A tiny flame flickered to life, a pathetic spark of defiance in the overwhelming dark. We huddled around it, but its heat was a ghost, a mere suggestion of warmth that could not penetrate the profound chill that had settled deep in our marrow. My body had begun to betray me in strange ways. The shivering that had racked my frame uncontrollably started to subside, replaced by a dangerous, creeping numbness. A strange sense of lethargy washed over me. This is where my memory begins to fray, the edges blurring into a delirious nightmare. The fire was failing. The desperate efforts to climb the cedar for more wood ended in falls, in broken limbs. There was a strange disconnect between my mind and my body. I felt a bizarre urge to take off my sweater, a phantom sensation of burning heat spreading across my skin, even as I knew I was freezing to death. I saw Igor, our leader, trying to rally the others, his face a mask of grim resolve. He wanted us to return to the tent, a suicidal notion, but one born of a leader's desperate need to do something. Some followed him, a small, doomed procession staggering back up the slope into the heart of the storm. I did not. I could not. I remember stumbling away from the dying fire, away from the cedar, drawn by an unseen current towards the deeper darkness of the ravine. Time lost all meaning. Was it minutes or hours? The forest became a labyrinth of menacing shapes, the trees like silent, judgmental figures. I was alone now, truly alone. The pain in my feet had vanished, and when I looked down, I couldn't feel the snow anymore. My mind began to play tricks on me. I saw lights again, not the terrifying orange orb, but soft, gentle lights dancing between the trees, like distant lanterns. They seemed to beckon me forward, promising warmth, promising rest. I fell into a deep snowdrift at the edge of the ravine. The struggle was over. A strange and profound peace settled over me, a gentle acceptance of the end. The howling of the wind faded to a soft whisper. It was almost comfortable. I was just so tired. I closed my eyes, letting the heavy blanket of snow cover me. But just before the darkness took me completely, one final image burned itself into my fading consciousness. I wasn't looking at the trees or the sky. I was looking down at my own chest, and in the strange, pearlescent light of the snow, I saw it. My ribcage. It felt wrong, crushed inward by a force that had left no mark upon my skin. And I understood, in that last lucid moment, that the thing on the mountain, the humming, the light, it hadn't just scared us, it had touched us. The snows melted. Spring, hesitant and slow, began to reclaim the mountain, revealing the secrets the winter had tried to keep. My voice now is just a whisper on the wind that still blows across this slope, a faint echo of the life that was violently extinguished here. I watched as they came, the searchers, their faces etched with grim concern. They found our tent first, a collapsed and frozen ruin, slashed open from the inside, a monument to our final moments of shared terror. Our belongings, our skis, our food, all left behind, testament to a flight not from hunger or cold, but from something far, far worse. They followed the trail of our desperate footprints, a scattered line leading from the tent down towards the tree line, a path of 9 souls fleeing into oblivion. They found my body and Georgi's under the great cedar, our hands burned and broken from the futile attempt to conjure fire. They noted we were stripped to our underwear. They couldn't understand it. They called it paradoxical undressing, a trick of extreme hypothermia, but it wasn't the cold that made us feel like we were burning. Then they found Igor, Zina, and Rustam, spaced out on the long, lonely climb back towards the tent. Frozen statues pointing the way to their own tomb, their lives given in a last, hopeless attempt to seek shelter. For months, the mountain held the rest of us in its embrace. But the spring sun is persistent. It thawed the deep snows in the ravine. It was there they found the last 4 of us, buried under more than 4 meters of snow. And it was here that the mystery deepened into something dark and unfathomable. We had injuries that no fall, no simple force of nature could explain. Crushed ribs and fractured skulls, sustained with the force of a car crash, yet with no external wounds, no bruising on the skin. Lyudmila was found without her tongue. The official report would be vague, speaking of animals after death. But there were no tracks, no signs of a struggle. It was clinical, precise. They closed the investigation. The final verdict, a phrase as empty and vast as the sky above us. Death by a compelling natural force. A natural force. That is what they called the humming vibration that shook our souls. That is what they named the silent, searing orange light that drove us mad. That is their explanation for the invisible giant that crushed the life from us in the dark ravine. They do not understand. They cannot. They see a tragedy, a mountaineering accident. I see a warning. This mountain, this place, is a borderland. It is a place where the veil between worlds is thin. We crossed a threshold we were never meant to cross. We were not killed by the cold or the wind. We were silenced. Silenced because we saw something we shouldn't have. My story is over. It has melted with the snows and now flows in the streams that run down this slope. It is whispered by the leaves on the stunted trees. If you find yourself in a quiet, wild place, and the silence suddenly feels too loud, and you feel the weight of unseen eyes upon you, perhaps you will think of us. Think of the 9 smiles in a fading photograph, frozen in time, just before the world turned white and the humming began. We are a part of the mountain's story now, an eternal echo of fear on the mountain of the dead. The whispers on this mountain never truly fade. They become stories, carried on the wind, waiting for someone to listen. If our echo has reached you, let it be known. Press the like button so this story may travel further than we ever could. And subscribe to become a keeper of the whispers that linger in the world's forgotten corners, lest they be silenced forever.